My father didn't forget me at Father's Day dinner. He placed me exactly where he thought I belonged, at the end of the table. My place card didn't even say Hargrove, just Gannon. Like I was a guest. Like I was temporary. Then he raised his glass, praised every child he was proud of, looked straight at me, and called me the failure. People laughed. My mother looked down, and right then, I understood the truth. I wasn't forgotten. I had been edited out, so I reached for the sealed envelope in my coat. I used to think being left out meant someone forgot to make room for me. That night taught me something worse. Sometimes a family knows exactly where they're placing you, and they expect you to stay there quietly. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Because by the time my father opened that envelope, no one in that house was laughing anymore. I almost turned the car around twice on the drive from Pittsburgh to Westchester. The first time was outside Harrisburg, when the highway opened wide and the sky turned that soft June gold that makes everything look kinder than it is. The second time was 10 minutes from my father's house, when I passed a gas station and thought about pulling in, buying coffee, and heading straight back west. But I kept driving. Not because I wanted to be there, because inside my coat pocket were two things I had carried for 3 hours, a blank Father's Day card and a sealed white envelope. The card was for the man I had spent 35 years trying to call Dad without feeling like I was forcing the word. The envelope was for Alden Hargrove. There is a difference. The Hargrove house sat at the end of a long stone driveway, all trimmed hedges and warm windows, the kind of place that looked like it belonged on a Christmas card even in summer. Catering vans were parked near the side entrance. Through the front windows I could already see movement, people laughing, glasses catching light, Sloane's careful decorations placed exactly where guests would notice them. That house always knew how to welcome strangers. It had never been as good at welcoming me. I parked behind a black Cadillac I didn't recognize and stepped out. For a moment, I stood beside my car and adjusted my jacket, not because it needed adjusting, but because my hands needed something to do. Inside, the foyer smelled like roast beef, bourbon, floor polish, and the kind of flowers Sloane always bought when she wanted a room to look softer than the people in it. A young server near the entry table looked up from a printed guest list. "Are you with catering, sir?" She said it politely. That almost made it worse. I gave her the small smile I had learned to use in rooms where I didn't want trouble. "No, I'm Alden's son." Her face changed. Just a little. She checked the list again, running one finger down the page. "Oh, I'm sorry. Let me see." I saw it before she could hide it. Hargrove family was printed in bold near the top. Brecken Hargrove, Sloane Hargrove, Maribel Hargrove, Alden Hargrove. Under a separate section, smaller and lower on the page, was my name. Additional seating. Gannon. No last name. I said nothing. The server gave me a strained smile and pointed toward the dining room. "You're all set." That was the first lie of the night. The dining room was already full of noise. My older brother Brecken stood near the fireplace with 2 contractors from Hargrove & Sons, laughing like he had never once wondered whether the room belonged to him. Sloane was near the projector, giving instructions to a man with a laptop. My mother Maribel moved between guests with that soft, practiced face she wore whenever my father's temper might become a weather event. Then I saw the table. Long, polished, formal. Alden's chair sat at the head like a throne nobody admitted was a throne. Near him, a place card read, Brecken Hargrove, Residential Division. Across from that, Sloane Hargrove, Hargrove Foundation. My mother's card had her full name in dark blue script. At the far end, near the kitchen doors, close enough to hear the plates being stacked, was mine, Gannon. Just Gannon. I stared at it longer than I should have. A reasonable person might have called it a printing mistake. A tired person might have let it go. I had spent most of my life being both. But that night, something about the missing name felt too neat, too clean, like someone had taken a pair of scissors to the part of me that still wanted to belong. My mother came up beside me. "Gannon," she said softly, "you made it." I nodded toward the card. Looks like most of me did. Her eyes flicked down. She saw it. I know she saw it. "It's just a card, honey," she whispered. "Please don't start anything tonight." That line landed harder than the card, not because she meant to hurt me, because she didn't understand that she had just named the family rule. My pain was acceptable as long as it stayed quiet. The moment I pointed to it, I became the problem. "I'm not starting anything," I said. And I wasn't. Not yet. I took my seat at the end of the table. The chair legs scraped softly against the hardwood. No one looked over except a cousin I barely knew, who gave me the kind of nod people give when they can't remember whether they should hug you. From where I sat, I could see the whole family arranged by importance. Alden at the head, Brecken close enough to receive approval without asking, Sloane near the screen managing the story, Maribel floating between peace and panic, and me next to the kitchen doors with a blank Father's Day card in one pocket and an envelope in the other. Have you ever walked into a family gathering and felt like everyone had a place except you? I don't mean a seat. I had a seat. I mean a place. There's a difference. I rested one hand over my coat pocket, feeling the stiff edge of the card, then the thicker weight of the envelope behind it. Across the table, Alden stood by the fireplace, holding a glass of bourbon, smiling at a room that had always been trained to smile back. Before my father ever raised his glass, I found out my voice had already been removed from the evening. I stayed seated for maybe 2 minutes before Sloane appeared at my shoulder with that tight little smile she used when she wanted help but didn't want to admit she needed it. "Gannon, can you take a look at the projector? It's not reading my laptop." I looked down the table. Brecken was still laughing near the fireplace. Alden was accepting compliments from 2 men I recognized from the county zoning board. Nobody asked them to fix anything. That was usually where I came in. "Sure," I said, pushing my chair back. Sloane gave me a grateful pat on the arm. "You've always been good with technical stuff." Technical stuff. That covered a lot in my family. Financial models, contract reviews, emergency budget fixes. Anything complicated enough to be useful, but not visible enough to be praised. I followed her to the side of the room, where the laptop sat on a narrow table beside the projector. A blue cable hung loose behind it. Simple problem. I plugged it in, adjusted the display, and the screen on the wall came alive. The first slide filled the room, celebrating the Hargrove legacy. Sloane stepped away to answer a question from the caterer, so I clicked through to make sure the formatting held. I wasn't snooping, not at first. The first photo showed Alden as a younger man, standing proudly beside the company's first construction truck. The next slide showed Brecken receiving a regional business award. Big smile, polished suit, Alden's hand on his shoulder. Then Sloane, at a foundation gala, standing beneath a banner with our family name. Then the grandchildren in matching shirts at some charity walk. Then my mother, Maribel, with the words, "The heart that held us together." I waited for the next slide. There wasn't one. The presentation ended on a soft fade to black. I clicked backward, then forward again. Slower this time. Alden, Brecken, Sloane, grandkids, Maribel, company, foundation, legacy. Nothing about me. Not a work photo. Not a childhood picture. Not even one of those awkward family snapshots where someone gets caught blinking. I searched the desktop. One folder said Father's Day program. Another said final version. A third one, half hidden behind the browser window, caught my eye. Do not use G. My hand stopped on the trackpad. I opened it. There were 3 pictures inside. One from my college graduation, where I stood in a black gown beside my mother. One from a company picnic, where I was half turned toward the camera. One from a hospital fundraiser, where I had been standing at the edge of a group photo. All rejected. Not deleted. Saved separately. Labeled. Sloane came back before I closed the folder. Her eyes went to the screen, then to my face. The color left her cheeks for half a second. "It wasn't meant to be personal," she said. I let my hand fall away from the laptop. "What part wasn't personal?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out right away. Behind her, guests were moving toward the dining table, pulling chairs out, laughing about traffic and golf and retirement plans. Sloane lowered her voice. "Dad organized most of it." There it was. The oldest family excuse. Dad decided. Dad meant well. Dad has his reasons. In our house, responsibility could disappear if it stood close enough to Alden. I closed the folder. "The projector works." "Gannon," she said, softer now. But I was already walking back to my seat. Dinner began a few minutes later. Plates came out, glasses were filled, and the slideshow played on the wall, while everyone pretended it was just a sweet family tribute. People smiled at old photos. Brecken leaned back as one of the contractors said, "Your dad must be proud. Quite a legacy you're stepping into." Brecken gave a modest little shrug. "I'm trying not to mess it up." A man across from me turned. "And what do you do, Gannon? Which division is yours?" Before I could answer, Brecken cut in. "Gannon does consulting." He said it like a polite way of saying unemployed cousin. I looked at him across the table. "Financial strategy," I said evenly. "Risk and restructuring." The man nodded, but the conversation had already moved on. Brecken was telling a story about a lake house project, and Alden was smiling like he had built the boy himself from concrete and ambition. I sat there with my hands folded, listening to people celebrate a family history that had been edited to remove me. That was the thing about being erased. Most of the time, nobody grabbed you by the shoulders and pushed you out the door. They just stopped saying your name. They left your chair near the kitchen. They called your work help. They called your hurt making a scene. My mother slipped into the chair beside me for a moment before the next course. She didn't look at the screen. She looked at me. "You've always mattered to me," she whispered. I wanted that to be enough. I really did. But love that only whispered had never been strong enough to protect me from cruelty that spoke into microphones. What's worse, being openly hated or being treated like you were never there at all? The projector light flickered across the wall. Faces appeared, smiles appeared, generations appeared. Everyone belonged somewhere, everyone except me. Then the final slide faded to black, and Alden Hargrove rose from his chair, reaching for his wine glass. Alden did not have to clear his throat. He never did. When he rose from his chair, the room adjusted itself around him. Forks lowered. Side conversations faded. Even the guests who knew him only through business understood that when Alden Hargrove stood with a glass in his hand, he expected attention before he earned it. I sat at the far end of the table, with the kitchen doors behind me and the projector still cooling against the wall. The last image from Sloane's presentation had vanished, but I could still see it in my mind. A family legacy with no room for me. Alden smiled at everyone, as if he had just given us something generous. "Well," he began, lifting his wine glass, "I won't keep everyone from dessert too long." A few people chuckled. He thanked the caterers. He thanked the longtime employees. He thanked dear friends of the family, which in Alden's language usually meant people who were useful enough to invite, but not close enough to challenge him. Then he turned toward Brecken. "My oldest son has become everything a father hopes to see in the next generation," Alden said. "Steady hands, sound judgment, a man who understands responsibility." Brecken looked down with that polished humility. Successful sons learn early. The room applauded. Contractors nodded. Someone said, "Well deserved." Alden placed a hand on Brecken's shoulder. "The future of Hargrove & Sons is in good hands." I watched Brecken accept it, not greedily. That might have been easier to hate. He accepted it like weather, like inheritance, like the natural order of things. Then Alden turned to Sloane. "And my daughter," he said, his voice warming just enough for guests to notice, "has carried our family name into the community with grace. The foundation has reached people I never could have reached from a job site or boardroom." Sloane pressed a hand to her chest. She smiled the way people smile when they have practiced being moved. More applause. Then the grandchildren got their moment. The future, the continuation, the next branch of the tree. Everyone raised glasses. I kept mine on the table. Alden's eyes moved slowly down the length of the room until they reached me. Something changed then. Not loudly, not in a way anyone would admit later, but the air shifted. People who had been smiling waited to see what he would do. That was when I understood something I should have understood years earlier. This was not new behavior. It was a family tradition. My father cut me in public, and everyone else watched to learn how deep the cut was allowed to go. Alden's smile widened by a fraction. "I'm proud of every child I've raised," he said. He paused, long enough for the sentence to sound complete. Then he added, "Except the failure at the end of the table." For one clean second, nobody moved. Then came the laughter. Not from everyone. That mattered later. But enough. A cousin gave a nervous bark and looked around to see if it was safe. One of Brecken's contractors smiled into his glass. Someone near my mother made a soft sound, the kind people make when they want a cruel thing to pass as humor. Brecken did not laugh. Sloane did not laugh. But they did not speak either. And silence, in that room, had always worked for Alden. My mother's face folded in on itself. She looked at me and whispered, "I'm sorry." I believed she meant it. That almost made it worse. Because sorry did not stand up. Sorry did not interrupt. Sorry did not say, "Alden, that's enough." Sorry sat there in pearls in a pale blue dress, asking me to survive another evening quietly. Alden kept talking as if he had only teased me. "Families keep us humble," he said, and a few guests laughed again, softer this time. I heard the words, but they no longer reached me in order. My mind drifted, not away from the room, but through it, through all the rooms before this one. A Little League game where Brecken struck out 3 times and Alden said, "At least he swings like a man." A piano recital where I won first place, and my father left before the awards because a client had called. A college graduation where he arrived late, shook my hand like I was an employee, and left before the photos. A company dinner where he introduced Brecken as my son and me as Gannon. Tiny moments, easy to dismiss one at a time. That was how families got away with it. They never handed you the whole wound at once. They gave it to you in pieces and called you sensitive when you finally noticed the pattern. If someone insulted your child in front of an entire room, would you stay silent? Be honest. I looked down at my place card. Gannon. No last name, no title, no claim. Alden raised his glass toward the room. To family. Everyone followed him. Almost everyone. The movement was small, but the meaning was not. Glasses lifted from both sides of the table. Crystal caught the chandelier light. Faces turned toward Alden, toward Brecken, toward the glowing picture of legacy he had built one edited scene at a time. No one raised a glass toward me. I was sitting there, breathing, watching, present enough to insult, but not enough to include. Then, strangely, the panic I expected never came. My breathing slowed. My shoulders settled. Inside my coat pocket, my thumb found the edge of the sealed envelope. The paper bent slightly under the pressure. For years, I had asked the wrong question. Why doesn't he love me? At 35 years old, at the end of that polished table, I finally asked a better one. What if this was never about me? Alden was still speaking when I pushed my chair back. The sound of wood against hardwood carried farther than I expected. One by one, faces turned. Brecken stopped moving his glass. Sloane's hand froze near her napkin. My mother whispered my name, but this time, I did not look at her. Alden stopped mid-sentence. I stood, slowly, not with anger, not with theatrics, just enough calm to make the room understand that something had changed. Then I reached into my coat and touched the envelope. As my fingers closed around it, I realized I wasn't standing up to defend myself anymore. I was standing up to bury a lie. The room watched my hand move into my coat. That was the strange part. Not one person asked if I was all right. Not one person said my father had gone too far. They only watched, because in my family, pain was never treated as an emergency unless it threatened the schedule. I pulled out the envelope, plain white, sealed, no name on the front. Alden's eyes narrowed, but he kept his posture relaxed. He was still standing at the head of the table, still holding his glass, still trying to look like a man in control of his own house. "What are you doing?" Brecken asked. I did not answer him. I stepped away from my chair and started down the long side of the table. The walk felt longer than it should have. Every shoe tap against the hardwood seemed to land in the silence. A server moved aside near the kitchen doors, holding a tray against her chest like she had wandered into something private and didn't know how to escape. Alden watched me come closer. At first, he looked annoyed. Then, when I didn't speak, something smaller entered his face. Not fear, not yet. More like irritation mixed with uncertainty. I had broken the pattern, and men like Alden Hargrove trusted patterns more than people. For 35 years, I had done what they expected. I absorbed the remark. I made the polite answer. I went home angry, then came back months later hoping the next dinner would be different. That night, I did none of it. When I reached my father's chair, I placed the envelope beside his plate. right next to the polished silverware, right near the untouched slice of Father's Day cake, with blue icing around the edges. Then I looked at him and said, "Happy Father's Day." A few people shifted in their seats. The sentence sounded simple. That was why it unsettled them. If I had shouted, they could have called me unstable. If I had accused him, they could have said I was making a scene. But I gave him a gift and let the room decide what kind of gift it was. Alden glanced down. "What is this?" "You'll understand after I leave." Brecken pushed his chair back. "Come on, Gannon. Don't be dramatic." I looked at him then, not with anger, with something closer to pity. "Dramatic?" I said. "He called me a failure in front of a dining room full of people, and I'm dramatic because I'm leaving?" Brecken's face tightened. "That's not what I meant." "It usually isn't." Sloane stood halfway, one hand on the table. "Please don't do this tonight." That sentence nearly made me laugh, but I was too tired for laughter. "Tonight?" I asked. "When would be better? Thanksgiving? Christmas? Maybe after another slideshow where I don't exist?" Her eyes dropped. My mother rose from her chair. "Gannon, honey, wait." She took 2 steps toward me. Only 2. That was my mother's tragedy. She loved me in steps, never all the way across the room. For a moment, I almost softened. I had spent most of my life softening at the sight of her pain. She looked frightened, and some part of me still wanted to protect her from the consequences of choices she refused to explain. Then I saw my place card at the far end of the table. Gannon, just Gannon. I walked back to my seat, picked it up, and held it between 2 fingers. The card was heavier than paper should have been. No last name, no title, no family claim. I set it down exactly where I had found it. "Keep it," I said quietly. No one answered. I turned toward the front hall. Behind me, I heard Brecken mutter, "This is ridiculous." Alden's voice followed, colder now. "If you walk out that door, don't expect everyone to chase you." I stopped near the foyer. For years, that kind of sentence would have worked. It would have pulled me back, made me apologize for the discomfort he created. But something in me had already stepped outside before my body did. I looked over my shoulder. Nobody ever did. Then I left. The night air hit my face as soon as I stepped onto the porch. The warmth from the house vanished behind me. I walked down the stone steps, across the drive, and to my SUV parked under a maple tree near the catering vans. I got in, shut the door, and sat there without starting the engine. That was when my hands began to tremble. Not inside the house, not in front of Alden, not while every eye measured me, only alone. I gripped the steering wheel and stared through the windshield at the glowing windows. My breathing sounded too loud in the quiet car. I had imagined that leaving would feel powerful. It didn't. It felt like stepping off a porch in the dark and not knowing whether there was ground beneath you. Later, I learned what happened inside after I left. For almost a minute, nobody touched the envelope. Then Alden picked it up with the irritated confidence of a man opening a bill he intended to dispute. He slid one finger under the seal, pulled out the folded papers, and began reading. Maribel saw the first page over his shoulder. Her hand went to her mouth. Brecken stood, but did not move closer. Sloane went pale. Alden read the page again, then the next one. Then he stopped. That was what Brecken told me later. Not that Alden shouted, not that he denied anything, just that he stopped, as if his body had forgotten what came after breathing. For the first time anyone could remember, my father had nothing ready to say. I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that I started the SUV and pulled away from the estate, leaving the house bright behind me. The road curved through the trees, and by the time I reached the county highway, my phone had begun to buzz in the cup holder. I did not look at it. I kept driving. I thought leaving that house would bring relief, but by midnight I discovered the DNA report wasn't the beginning of the story. It was only the first crack in a much older lie. By the time I reached the hotel, the anger had burned off and left something worse behind. Quiet. I checked in under my own name, paid with my own card, and carried my overnight bag down a beige hallway that smelled like carpet cleaner and old coffee. The room was plain. One bed, one desk, one lamp with a crooked shade. Nothing in it knew me, expected me, or needed me to pretend. For a few minutes, that felt like mercy. Then my phone started lighting up. Brecken called first. then Sloan, then Brecken again. A text from a cousin said, "What in the world was that?" Another message from someone at the dinner simply read, "Are you okay?" That one almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because people always ask if you are okay after watching you get hurt in real time, as if the question can substitute for courage. I put the phone face down on the bed. My jacket hung over the chair. The blank Father's Day card sat on the desk beside my wallet. I had taken it out without realizing it. The card was still clean, empty, a little bent at one corner. I stared at it for a long time. The man I had bought it for was not my father. The test results in that envelope had said it clearly. Probability of paternity, 0%. I had read those words so many times before dinner that they no longer looked like English. Still, handing them to Alden had not made them easier to carry. Near midnight, my phone rang again. Mom. I let it ring twice, 3 times. Then I answered. Neither of us spoke at first. I could hear her breathing, thin and uneven, like she had been holding herself together with both hands. "Gannon," she said. That was all. Then she started crying. My mother was not a woman who cried easily. She apologized. She smoothed things over. She made coffee, changed subjects, pressed napkins into people's hands. Crying meant the wall had cracked. "Where are you?" she asked. "Safe." That's not what I asked. It's the answer I'm giving. A soft sound came through the phone. Pain, maybe, or guilt. Then she said the words that changed the shape of the night. "Did you already know?" I sat up slowly, not because of the question, because she had skipped denial. I looked at the blank card on the desk. "You knew?" The silence that followed was not empty. It was crowded with years. "I didn't know for certain," she whispered. "That's a careful answer. Please don't do that." "Do what?" "Talk to me like I'm on trial." I closed my eyes. "Mom, I spent my whole life on trial in that house. You don't get to complain because I finally asked for evidence." She cried harder then, but I did not soften the way I usually did. I loved my mother, that was true, but love had become the place where everyone hid the things they did not want to confess. She told me there had been a man before I was born. Not some scandalous story, not a romance novel, just a mistake, she said. A lonely season, a marriage already strained. A man named Callum Rusk, someone she had known before Alden became Alden Hargrove to the rest of the county. I was scared, she said. I thought if I admitted there was a possibility, everything would fall apart. "So you let me fall apart instead?" She did not answer. That was answer enough. I stood and walked to the window. The parking lot below was nearly empty. A delivery truck sat under a yellow light. Somewhere down the hall, an ice machine rattled and stopped. "How long has he known?" I asked. "I don't know, Mom." "I don't know," she said again, but her voice bent around the words. That was when I understood she was not deciding whether to tell me the truth. She was deciding how much truth she could survive giving me. "All those times," I said, "when you told me Dad loved me in his own way. He did provide for you. That's not love. That's a line people use when they don't want to admit a child was lonely." Her breath caught. I regretted hurting her. I did not regret saying it. The call ended without yelling. That made it worse. There was no clean break, no slammed door, no dramatic final sentence. Just my mother saying, "I'm sorry," and me realizing I no longer knew what those words were worth. After I hung up, I sat at the small desk and pulled a hotel pen from beside the notepad. I began writing questions. Who knew? When? Did Alden suspect? Or did he know? Why keep me in the family but outside the family? Was the name Hargrove ever mine? Or just something they let me borrow? The page filled quickly. My handwriting got smaller as I went. Then I stopped at the question I could not bring myself to write. Do I belong anywhere? Around 2 a.m, memories began arriving without permission. Alden refusing to hang my school portrait in the front hallway because, he said, we don't need every picture up. A county dinner where he introduced Brecken as my son and then turned to me with, "And this is Gannon." A joke he made once at Thanksgiving after I corrected him on a contract clause. "You must have inherited that stubborn streak from somewhere else." Everyone had laughed. Now the joke had teeth. If you discovered your entire family history might be built on a lie, would you want the truth? Or would part of you wish you could go back to believing the story? Just before dawn, my phone buzzed again. This time it was from Miles Keene, a young analyst I mentored at work. Just checking in. You once told me not to disappear when life gets ugly, so I'm checking in. I stared at that message longer than I expected. It was not family. It was not blood. It was not history. But it was someone noticing whether I vanished. That mattered more than I wanted to admit. A few minutes later, another message came in. My mother. It had no explanation, only a scanned photograph. A young woman, I recognized as Maribel, stood beside a man I had never seen. He was tall, lean, with tired, kind eyes, and one hand resting on the hood of an old pickup. On the back of the photo, in faded handwriting, was a date from months before I was born. Under the image, my mother had typed 2 words, "I'm sorry." Morning light entered the room in pale strips across the carpet. I sat there with the photograph in one hand and the blank Father's Day card in the other. One showed the father I never really had. The other showed the man I might have come from. The photo should have answered my questions, but instead it gave me a face I couldn't stop staring at, and a past someone had spent 35 years trying to bury. I did not sleep after that photograph arrived. I tried. I turned off the lamp, set my phone face down, and lay on top of the hotel comforter fully dressed. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same thing. My mother, younger than I had ever known her. A man beside her, Callum Rusk. By 7:30, I had showered, put on the same shirt from dinner, and packed the papers into my briefcase. I did not feel rested. I felt organized, which was not the same thing, but it was all I had. I drove into Philadelphia under a pale morning sky, the kind that makes the city look washed clean before traffic proves otherwise. I was not chasing Alden's approval anymore. That realization came to me somewhere near the Schuylkill Expressway, while brake lights flashed ahead of me in long red lines. I was chasing evidence. There was a difference. The records office smelled like dust, toner, and old paper. A clerk behind thick glass helped me search property filings, employment records, and archived professional licenses. I gave her Callum's name, then stood there while she typed. Callum Rusk had been a civil engineer. Bridge inspections, municipal contracts, short-term work in Pennsylvania 36 years earlier. Nothing dramatic appeared on the screen. No scandal, no headline, no secret criminal past. Just a real man. A man who had been in the right place at the right time to change my entire life before I even had one. The proof brought relief first, then fear. Relief because my mother had not invented him to soften the blow. Fear because every confirmed detail took another brick out of the house I had built inside my own mind. Outside the office, I stood on the sidewalk with copies folded inside a brown envelope. People passed me carrying coffee, wearing badges, talking into phones. The world kept moving with irritating ease. My phone rang. Sloan. I almost ignored it. Then I remembered her face at dinner, the way she had gone pale when she saw that folder labeled, "Do not use." G. I answered. "Gannon," she said, and for once she did not sound polished. "What do you want?" "To meet. Please, just 20 minutes. "Sloan, I'm not interested in another speech about timing. That's not why I'm calling." Her voice shook on the last word. We met at a small cafe not far from Independence Hall. She arrived in sunglasses, though the room was dim. She ordered tea and never touched it. When she finally spoke, her hands were wrapped around the cup. "I heard something when I was 16, she said. I waited. "I came downstairs late one night. Mom and Dad were arguing in his study. I didn't hear all of it, but I heard him say," she looked down, "I agreed to raise him. That doesn't mean I have to pretend." The cafe noise seemed to drop away. A spoon against a saucer, a chair sliding, someone laughing near the counter. All of it felt far off. "You never told me." "I was 16, she said. "I thought maybe it was about money, or your attitude, or one of Dad's moods. I told myself it wasn't my business." That worked out well for everyone. Her eyes filled, but she did not defend herself. That mattered. I kept saying, "That's just Dad." I said it so many times it started sounding like an excuse instead of an explanation. "It was both," I said. She nodded. and the tears slipped down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I believed her. But belief did not erase the years she had spent arranging the family story around the space where I should have been. Do you think silence makes someone innocent when they know something is wrong? After Sloane left, I sat alone with the brown envelope in front of me. I wanted the truth. I also understood, sitting there among strangers, that truth is not a clean thing. It does not arrive like sunlight. Sometimes it comes in with muddy shoes and steps on everything you are trying to preserve. If I kept digging, I might finish breaking what remained of my family. If I stopped, I would spend the rest of my life helping them bury me. Back at the hotel that evening, I emptied my jacket pockets onto the desk. The DNA report, the photograph of Callum Rusk, a copy of his old employment listing. Then something small fell out. The place card from Father's Day. Gannon. I did not remember taking it. Maybe my hand had closed around it when I left the table. Maybe some part of me knew I would need proof that it had happened. The ink had smudged slightly along the edge. The cardstock was bent in the middle. I ran my thumb over the crease and stared at the missing last name. At dinner, it had felt like an insult. Now it felt like an accident of honesty. The Hargrove name had been placed on me, but never fully given. Around 8, I called Orson Vale, the Hargrove family attorney. He was semi-retired by then, but his voice still had that careful lawyer's weight. "I need to know what Alden knew," I said. Orson exhaled. "That is not a simple question. It is from where I'm standing." "No," he said quietly. "It is not." He agreed to meet in his small office the next morning, but I heard enough in his hesitation to know the answer already had a shape. Before we hung up, I asked, "Were there legal concerns about me?" Orson was silent for a moment too long. "Your father was concerned about implications if certain matters ever became public." Certain matters. Not rumors, not questions. Matters. That sounded like knowledge. After the call, I sat at the desk until the room grew dark around me. The 3 objects remained beneath the lamp: the card, the report, and Callum's photograph. 3 pieces of a life I no longer knew how to name. Then my phone lit up. Unknown number. 1 sentence. "Stop digging if you care about your mother." No signature. No explanation. The threat should have scared me into walking away, but instead it revealed something far more important. Someone was afraid of what I might uncover next. I read the message 5 times before I moved. "Stop digging if you care about your mother." The words should have frightened me. Instead, they focused me. Whoever sent it was not trying to protect Alden. Not exactly. The warning circled my mother like she was the fragile part of the story. That told me the secret was larger than a DNA report. I printed the text, added it to the folder, and wrote the time beside it. That was what I did when feelings became too big. I made a record. Paper did not panic. Paper did not make excuses. Paper stayed where you put it. The next morning, I met Orson Vale in his office, above a title company that smelled like old carpet and coffee. He looked older than I remembered, smaller behind his desk, but his eyes were still careful. "I'm not here to accuse you," I said. "I'm here to understand what was done in my name." That sentence worked better than anger. Orson folded his hands. "Your name was a complicated matter." "My name," I said, "was printed on a place card without a last name 2 nights ago. So let's not pretend it's complicated only on paper." He looked away. Behind him, stacked near a file cabinet, sat a gray archive box marked Hargrove Family Trust Revision. The date on the label was 6 months before I was born. I did not reach for it. I only looked at it long enough for Orson to notice. "You can't access that without authorization," he said. I didn't ask. "No," he replied, "but you saw it." That was enough. By mid-afternoon, my mother called and asked to meet without Alden, without Sloane, without anyone managing the damage. We met at a small lake outside West Chester, a quiet place with benches facing the water. She said she used to come there when she was pregnant with me. That detail hurt before she said anything else. Maribel sat with her purse in her lap, both hands gripping the strap. "Alden knew there was a possibility," she said. "Before you were born." I stared at the water. "Callum." She nodded. Callum Rusk had come through Pennsylvania on a bridge inspection contract. I knew him years before. It was brief. It was wrong. And when I realized I was pregnant, Alden did the math. And stayed. He stayed with conditions. There it was, the shape of my childhood. What conditions? She opened her purse and removed a folded copy sealed in a plastic sleeve. I kept this because I was ashamed to destroy it. It was not a formal contract, more like a private memorandum. Alden's handwriting appeared beside hers. The child will carry the Hargrove name and be raised within the family. I read the sentence once, then again. Nothing about love. Nothing about being a son. Nothing about protection. Just carry, be raised, within the family. Like placement, like inventory. My mother cried, but I did not comfort her. Not because I wanted to punish her, because the child in that document had spent his whole life comforting adults who failed him. Alden's greatest fear was never losing me, she said. It was being humiliated. I believed her. Alden could survive betrayal if nobody saw the bruise on his reputation. What he could not survive was public embarrassment. I had not been a child to him. I had been evidence. Have you ever realized someone wasn't angry at you for who you were, but for what you reminded them of? That was when something inside me changed. All my life, I thought, if I became successful enough, useful enough, quiet enough, he would finally claim me without hesitation. But no achievement could repair a problem that existed before I was born. Back at the hotel, I spread everything across the desk. The DNA report, Callum's photograph, the old records, the anonymous threat, the memorandum. Near the bottom of the page, I noticed one more line in Alden's handwriting. Some sacrifices are necessary to preserve the family. I sat back. There it was. Not said in anger, not shouted across a dinner table. Written calmly. Years ago, like policy, I had been the sacrifice. Not my money, not my career, me. By sunrise, I knew two things with absolute certainty. Alden had known for decades, and someone inside the family was still willing to do anything to keep that secret buried. The first attack came before breakfast. My phone started vibrating on the hotel desk while the sky was still gray. At first, I thought it was another family message. Then I saw an email from my firm's compliance department. Subject: immediate review required. That was the kind of subject line that made your stomach tighten before you even opened it. The attachment was anonymous, but it was not careless. Whoever wrote it knew enough about my work to sound convincing. It claimed I had misused confidential family business information, manipulated internal financial projections, and threatened to expose private documents unless the Hargroves compensated me. None of it was true. That did not make it harmless. My career was the one part of my life Alden had not handed to me, shaped for me, or withheld from me. I had built it the hard way, through late nights, audits, restructuring plans, and rooms where I had to be twice as prepared because my last name made people assume I had shortcuts. Now someone was trying to poison that too. For a few minutes, I just sat there with the laptop open, reading the same false paragraphs again and again. The old version of me would have called Brecken, or Sloan, or even my mother. I would have tried to explain. But explaining had always been their trap. If I stayed quiet, the lie could spread. If I reacted loudly, they could call me unstable. That was Alden's favorite kind of room, one with no clean exit. Then I remembered something Callum had said when I finally reached him by phone the night before. His voice had been calm, careful, almost gentle. Truth doesn't need volume, Gannon. It needs timing. So, I did not respond in anger. I started building a file. Emails, call logs, screenshots, the DNA report, the memorandum, the anonymous text, Orson's notes, the old trust revision date. Every piece went into a folder, labeled and time-stamped. By noon, Brecken had called 3 relatives and told them I was not in a good place. Sloan sent me a message that said, "Please stop before this destroys everyone." I typed back, "It already destroyed someone. You just didn't count him." She did not answer. Later that afternoon, Orson sent one more packet. Inside was a trust amendment created shortly after my birth. One line stood out. Due to unique family considerations, Gannon Hargrove shall hold no voting authority in family-controlled assets. Not due to age, not due to ability, not due to conduct. Unique family considerations. There it was in estate language. My exclusion had not been emotional, it had been planned. That changed my next move. I had considered asking for a private meeting. Then I realized private rooms had protected Alden for 35 years. The Hargrove Foundation Board had a scheduled meeting that evening. Advisors would be there. Family would be there. People who had applauded Alden's version of legacy would be there. So I went. The conference room was polished and quiet, with framed photos of charity events on the walls. Alden sat near the head of the table, Brecken beside him. Sloane looked pale. My mother looked like she had not slept. Alden spoke first. "This has gone far enough," he said. "You are trying to punish this family because you didn't get what you wanted." I placed my folder on the table. "I didn't create this story," I said. "I just stopped letting you tell it alone." Then I laid out the timeline. The DNA report, the memorandum, the trust amendment, the anonymous accusation. No speeches, no insults. Just facts, one after another, until the room had nowhere comfortable to look. Alden tried once more. "He is using pain as leverage." Orson, standing near the wall, cleared his throat. "No," he said. "The release he signed yesterday gives up any personal claim to Hargrove & Sons." Brecken turned toward me. I met his eyes. "I gave up the money before he could accuse me of wanting it." That was when Alden finally looked old. Not weak, not sorry, exposed. "I spent 35 years trying to preserve what I built," he said. The room went silent. Not because everyone was confused, because everyone understood. He had not preserved a family. He had preserved an image, and I had paid for it. At Father's Day dinner, I had sat at the end of the table while people laughed. Now I stood at the front of one, and nobody interrupted me. Winning did not feel sweet. It felt final. The truth had finally been spoken aloud, but what came after the silence would determine whether any part of this family could survive it. 3 months passed before I understood that consequences do not always arrive with sirens. There was no national scandal, no television crew outside the Hargrove office, no dramatic collapse that made people whisper in grocery store aisles. Real life is quieter than that. 2 foundation board members resigned. A donor asked for a private audit. One of Alden's longtime business friends stopped returning his calls. At church, people still shook his hand, but not with the same warmth. They held on a second less, looked away a second sooner. That was how a reputation cracked. Not all at once, just enough that the sound never left the room. I moved most of my work out of Pennsylvania for a while. Callum Rusk lived in Ohio, in a small house with a wide porch and shelves full of engineering books. We did not become father and son overnight. Life does not hand you 35 missing years and say, "Here, make this simple." We started with coffee, then phone calls, then Sunday dinner. Callum never pushed. He never asked me to call him Dad. He never acted wounded when I didn't. That alone told me more about him than any speech could have. One evening, he invited me to dinner with a few friends from his neighborhood. Nothing fancy. Pot roast, green beans, cornbread, a pie somebody had brought from a bakery in town. As people carried plates to the table, a woman named Helen smiled at me and said, "Where do you want to sit, honey?" The question stopped me. Nobody meant anything by it. That was why it mattered. I looked at the table. Round, worn at the edges, no head seat, no end seat, no printed cards deciding who mattered most. "Anywhere," I said. Then, more quietly, "I'm not at the end of anything anymore." Callum heard me. He did not make a scene. He only pulled out a chair. "Have you ever found family in people who were not related to you?" A few weeks later, Maribel called. Our conversations were still careful. Honest, but careful. She told me she had been sorting through an old storage room at the estate and found a box with my name on it. Alden had not given it to her. He had not given it to anyone. Inside were letters, dozens of them, never mailed. Some were only a few lines. Others were folded drafts with words crossed out so hard the paper had nearly torn. I read them sitting on the floor of my apartment. One said, "I don't know how to be the father you deserve." Another said, "Every year it becomes harder to fix what I refused to fix before." The one that stayed with me was unfinished. "If I die before I tell him the truth, he will spend his life believing the wrong things about himself." I put that page down and sat with it for a long time. It did not excuse him. Regret is not repair, but it did change the shape of the wound. Alden had not been empty. He had been afraid, proud, and weak in ways that cost another person his childhood. Can someone deeply hurt you and still regret what they did? I think they can. I also think regret does not get to ask for credit. That afternoon, I drove to a quiet overlook outside town. In my coat pocket were three things: the blank Father's Day card, the place card that said only Gannon, and a copy of Alden's unfinished letter. I did not bring them there for drama. I brought them because I was tired of carrying objects that had become heavier than paper. I kept the letter. The other two, I tore into pieces and dropped into a trash bin near the parking lot. That was enough. No ceremony, no speech, no grand ending. Just a man letting go of proof he no longer needed. That night, Callum handed me a small place card he had made as a joke for dinner. It said, Gannon Rusk. He smiled gently. Use it if you want. Don't if you don't. I looked at the name for a long moment. Then I set it beside my plate. Not because blood fixed everything, because choice mattered. Later, when I built my new consulting website, the form asked for my professional name. I typed Gannon. I paused. Then I added Rusk. For once, my name did not feel borrowed. It felt chosen. If you have ever felt invisible in your own family, I hope you remember this. Your worth was never supposed to be decided by people who refused to see it. Some people spend their lives trying to earn a seat at a table that was never built for them. Healing begins when you stop begging for a chair and build your own table.